What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Thomas, bringing you the newest edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I am back in Buffalo, New York, my home city, and I have had a terrible sinus infection / sinus headache the last 4 or 5 days. I went on a cruise, went on the Carnival Vista, went to Cozumel, Ocho Rio, Grand Cayman. Beautiful. Great trip. I came home, the change in the 85-degree weather to the 20 to 18 to 20 degree weather, I should say, in Buffalo caused me to get sick. So I'm just getting over it. You can probably still tell by my voice, maybe a little bit. But if I cough or sneeze during the broadcast, I apologize. I'd like to let that be known before the podcast gets fully underway. So this is part one of tonight's show. There's a lot of topics that I wanted to talk about for tonight. The first one is the latest in the world of mixed martial arts. I always try to stay as current in the mixed martial arts scene as I possibly can with this podcast, and I always try to tackle the hottest topics within the sport of mixed martial arts. And one of those topics is the recent aftermath with Bellator MMA, Bellator 170, which featured a high-profile main event between the Huntington Beach bad boy Tito Ortiz, the former UFC light heavyweight champion, and the challenger Chael Sonnen, the three-time title contender, WEC, UFC, and UFC 2 times, and UFC 3 times, 4-time title contender. He fought Paulo Filho in the WEC. That fight ended up not being a title fight because Filho missed weight. Chael Sonnen won it anyway, and Filho gave Chael Sonnen the belt, and the organization disbanded. So, a little bit of sports trivia there. But the main aftermath of the fight, which is a Tito Ortiz victory by first-round submission, by a first-round rear-naked choke, is the fact that most fans within the sport of MMA are arguing that this fight was a fix, which I think is completely ridiculous. I'm going to let that be known right away. This fight was not a fix. This fight was a fight that played out the way it did. It was not a fix. There was a video originally that showed Tito Ortiz tapping. Tito Ortiz was not tapping to that choke. There was a video that showed, obviously, Chael Sonnen not really hand fighting that well off the choke. By the time Chael Sonnen realized that he needed to hand fight, the choke was already in too tight. It was almost a neck crank type choke. Tito Ortiz is a very big human being. At the 205-pound weight class, he's a solid 205er, and he was going into this fight. Given the fact that this was his last fight in a career that spanned 2 decades versus a man that talks as much trash as Chael Sonnen does, Tito Ortiz did a long 12-week camp for this fight. Typically, fighters' camps are around 6 to 8 weeks. So Tito Ortiz really prepared himself for this fight, and Chael Sonnen felt the repercussions of his words over the course of the buildup of this fight. I thought Chael would win this fight easily. I put their resumes next to each other, who they fought, who they've beaten, and Chael really had a big edge over Tito Ortiz. His record, mixed martial arts-wise, 28-14. Going into the fight, Tito's was 18-12. Now Tito's is obviously 19-12, and Chael's is 28-15. Chael has fought a lot more fights over top-level competition, even though Tito Ortiz was the champion at one point at the UFC light heavyweight division. Chael Sonnen made the argument, which was a valid one, that he didn't really get the opportunity until he was in his early 30s that he had really dreamed for over the course of his MMA career. He didn't really get that chance at a title until his early 30s, which is actually factual. I was surprised at how different Chael looked physically. Obviously, Chael is known to take the testosterone replacement therapy when it was legal under the governing bodies of the MMA commissions. It is now illegal, and the 3 years off that Chael Sonnen took, I really think came back to bite him in the butt. I think that that's really the story of this fight, is the fact that one guy stayed relatively active, Tito Ortiz. The other guy has been retired for 3 years, being a part of the MMA media scene, being a part of the podcast scene, being a part of ESPN MMA, so at Fox Sports for a time. So, there were contributing factors. Chael Sonnen is not a 205-pound fighter. He's only fought there sporadically throughout his career. I think this was actually his third fight as a light heavyweight, as a 205-pounder. Chael was a career middleweight. He was a three-time middleweight title contender. And obviously, he talked his way into the fight with John Jones, being the fact that he took that fight on short notice and John Jones denied it. So that created a whole storyline to give Chael Sonnen the title shot versus John Jones. Obviously, Chael Sonnen did not win the fights with Anderson Silva. Obviously, Chael Sonnen didn't win the fight with John Jones. Chael has lost 4 of his last 5 fights. His last victory was versus Shogun back in March, I believe, of 2015. So it has been quite some time that Chael Sonnen has won a fight. Obviously, what's next for Tito? Tito is now retired. Tito now gets the proper send-off that he needed, a send-off that Chuck Liddell and Rich Franklin and guys that were in that era, Randy Couture, would have loved to have gotten a send-off like that. Instead, Chuck Liddell was knocked out by the one-armed Rich Franklin. Instead, Rich Franklin was then KTFO'd by Kung Lee, and instead Randy Couture was knocked out via a front face kick by Lyoto Machida, Karate Kid style, in Toronto back in April of 2011. That card was actually on my birthday. There was the GSP versus Jake Shields card at the Rogers Center, which featured 55,000 seats, full, packed house. And I'm going to talk about GSP in the next part of the podcast, so I want you guys to leave a little, a preview for the next part so you guys know what to expect. I'm going to talk about how the UFC at this point needs GSP and the reasons why. So that's what will be on the next podcast coming right up, the next part of today's show. So what's next for Chael Sonnen? Obviously, Chael isn't going anywhere. He just fought Tito Ortiz. He was supposed to fight Vanderlei Silva. Vanderlei is on that suspension till July. That was thrown down by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. I suspect that Chael will fight Vanderlei Silva in Bellator. It's the best fight that Bellator can make for a main event. Bellator is still kind of trying to crawl out of the underground level of MMA that they were at with Kimbo Slice. The Kimbo Slice era is obviously over. Now that Kimbo has passed away, rest in peace, Kimbo Slice. But they're trying to distance themselves away from the gimmick fights. The Ken Shamrock versus Hoist Gracie. The Ken Shamrock versus Kimbo. And obviously Bellator had to do that. The model for their advertising was putting big names against each other. Names that might be past their prime. They had to do that in order to draw fans to their brand. And the fact is, it's free on cable TV, so fans weren't paying for it. They weren't, giving up $40 to $50, $60 on HD to watch those fights. They were watching them for free on TV. And by putting like a guy like Ken Shamrock, a guy like Kimbo Slice in the main event, and you're tuning in watching it for free, Bellator is hoping that you're watching the other fights leading up to that, watching the entire production. And in most cases, fans are. So it was actually a smart model to put those fights as the main event, so it would force fans to watch it to see, what fights were before then, You'd see the real guys in Bellator, the Michael Chandlers, the David Rickles of the world. You'd see those guys going toe-to-toe with each other. Paul Daly, Brennan Ward was the co-main event for this Chael Sonnen, Tito Ortiz card. So it's actually very smart that they're putting fights together like this. And obviously, I suspect them to continue that trend. I think Chael versus Vanderlei will be next. I think Chael needs to get back in there as soon as possible. And as soon as possible versus Vanderlei would probably be in August. If they put the fight together and Vanderlei's suspension is up in July, I would assume that the fight would be in August, maybe September, at the latest October. Chael took 3 years off. He's got to get back in there as soon as he can. Maybe Chael takes another fight to get his feet wet again, but does Bellator risk putting him out there versus another name to get beat when really Chael is one of the main needle movers for Bellator? I don't see that happening. I think they put Vanderlei versus Chael together and hope that Fedor beats Matt Mitrione. Hope that the winner of the Vanderlei Chael fight comes out unscathed, and then they could put the winner of that fight up against Fedor. It's all about putting the biggest names together in a fight for Bellator right now. The guys with the most history behind their name to build that Bellator brand. Scott Coker is very good at doing that, and Bellator is making their way. There's a track of the Thomas Take, an episode of the Thomas Take, Bellator Rising. If you haven't checked that out, I go into great detail about how Bellator is improving their brand. I actually think they're doing a great job of being the number 2 MMA organization in the world. There's nothing wrong with having more variety in MMA. If the UFC was all there was, the MMA scene would actually be pretty boring. Just watching one channel, one variety of, one brand, I should say, of MMA. Bellator offers different things. They offer gimmick fights. Some of them are ridiculous. But the ones like Tito and Chael, I would have loved to have seen that fight in the UFC when those guys were in their prime. It just never happened. Bellator putting on the fights that the UFC never got the chance to put on, that's intriguing. One that is a bit of a head-scratcher, Rampage Jackson versus King Mo 2. That fight was a dud. And I expected Rampage to maybe be the guy that was fighting Fedor Emelianenko when they made the announcement that Fedor was going to be signing with Bellator. I thought that would be the matchup, but Fedor is fighting Matt Mitrione February 18th. Now Rampage is fighting King Mo. Maybe they'll do the winner of this fight versus Fedor. I'm not sure. This is the last fight on Rampage's contract with Bellator, and Rampage is actually still signed with the UFC, so if Bellator does not give him a better offer than the UFC, and he doesn't decide to retire, he could be heading back to the UFC. So that's another interesting storyline within Bellator. But I don't think this fight was a fix. Tito Ortiz trained his ass off. Chael Sonnen took some time off the last couple years. It showed. Give Tito the credit he deserves to finish the fight in early fashion. Devastating fashion, actually. And I didn't expect that. I don't think many people did. Many of the hardcore fans did. They thought Chael's pedigree would outweigh Tito, but they didn't take into consideration the ring rust. I took into consideration the physicality of Tito Ortiz at 205 compared to Chael at 205. I did in my prediction, but it was more so, I think, the ring rust rather than the physical mass of Tito Ortiz. That was my take on Bellator 170. Tito Ortiz versus Chael Sonnen. Was the fight a fix? No, it was not. Tune in for part 2 of the Thomas Take. Why does the UFC need Georges St. Pierre now more than ever?